Okay.
Hello, and welcome everybody to the September session of Life with Nassim. It's the first day of autumn, and I'm very excited to be here with you all. We've got another amazing opportunity to get to ask Nassim some questions and explore his vast reservoir of knowledge and get to see the world in a whole new light with some of the mind-bending insights that Nassim seems to bring us without limit. So I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. If you are just joining us, you can enter questions in the Q&A section. I'll be going through those. And there's also a voting mechanism there so that if you're seeing questions in the Q&A and ones that you would really like us to address, you can give them a thumbs up and it'll bring them higher up on the list. So they'll be more likely to get into the discussion. As well, we have the chat. And if you can set that to the host and to all the to everyone. So it has a couple options. Like sometimes I think the default is that it will just be panelists, host and panelists, and then everyone can't see your comment or your what you put into the comment section. So if you switch that to everyone, we can all see your comments. And feel free to say hi and tell us where you're joining from. We have people joining from all over the world, so it's great to see our community. And it's
Canada, Quebec, Italy, Sweden, wow, Japan, yeah, all around the world, one family.
So how's it going, Nassim?
Good. Good to be here again. Excited to share. You've been working in your lab. I've been working in my lab and everything else. And, we don't get to talk directly so much, although we work in the same building. So it's nice to see you and talk to you for the next 2 hours. So I look forward to it. And we always get amazing questions. We have so much going on right now. It's really exciting. I'm of course working on finishing the paper, and it's looking really good. It's so exciting what is emerging from these math, and we've been talking a little bit about biophysics, William and I, published prophetic patterns on it, and I'm really looking forward to writing the biophysics paper as well with William. It's gonna be fun. And we have as well, module 8 that's being prepared, and William is gonna help with that a lot. And in module 8, we'll be able to describe in layman's term the new paper, because it will be published with the new paper. And so this is kind of fun to do as well, because we can really kind of put it together for people. And although the paper is over 200 pages now, and it's a few thousand equations, the simplicity of the mechanics is so beautiful and remarkable in the relationships that actually writing it in layman's terms won't be that hard. Going from thermodynamics to gravito-electromagnetics and so on, meaning the mechanics will be clear and beautiful and simple. And we'll be able to refer back to the equations and everything so that people can understand the technical part if they're interested. And so we're preparing that, and we are working as well on preparing a next conference, a journey in Tulum for February. So I'm really excited about that. We're going to be on the Riviera Maya coast, and we'll be going to visit some sites and have amazing gathering for like 8 days. And I'm really looking forward to that, and to reconnect with the public and direct matter and people that won't be able to be there will be able to follow the journey online and register. And so there is a new site that was made that is nassimharamain.com, that people can go to. I think it's live now. And it's might be a little rudimentary right now because it's being worked on, but I wanted to let people know it's exciting. So we got so many things going on at the same time. And William, what's happening in your world?
Well, so I just got back from a conference on biohacking, biooptimization. We were out there presenting some of the science and the technology behind the advanced resonance kinetics technology, the ARC crystal. I've got a 8 matrix here. And so that was a pretty exciting event. Got to show the technology to a lot of people who hadn't ever heard of it before, and got to see a lot of excitement generated when the folks were learning about what's available with the resonance-based technology, as well as getting to talk with some folks who are doing other really fantastic stuff in the field of bioharmonization, boosting the biological system with novel mechanisms, using things like coherent field technology and, kind of like non-invasive techniques to boost vitality.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, it's exciting to see that field becoming more and more understood and deeper in its mechanisms and its rigor, and it really has to do with the future, because life extension from the fundamental biological structure is the future of humanity, and those fundamentals lie in the physical structure of the biology, the atomic level and the subatomic level. And so it's really beautiful to see the work that we did with the paper dovetailing perfectly into that dynamic, and it has to do with the mitochondria and the ATP production and how that is produced, and this is like the energy of the cells. So it's the heart of life, how life emerge, really, and how it maintains itself in a healthy condition and in optimal, condition. And it's really, you could think of it as a system that's that is in some ways portraying a, a a phase in which it is negentropic, right? It is growing in complexity, and it's getting more and more energetic, and it has, it's actually growing in negentropy, or in organization would be more accurate. And so you have a, negentropic function followed with a phase transition to an entropic function, right? So you have information moving in, then information moving out. So you have these cycles, right? And they, the cycles themselves go through this, but the cycles themselves are fractal, meaning like there's the cycle of the negentropic and entropic part of the atomic scale as well, and which is basically the energy that's going in and the energy that's coming out. So you can do it at that level and understand the mechanism and extract energy, for instance, or you can do it at the biological level, and in that case, implement energy, like increase the negentropic side, and so that the cellular matrix becomes more and more coherent, and like has a longer lifespan.
In a sense, that's kind of a really simplistic way to understand it, is that if you can maintain that negentropic dynamic, that negentropic state, that is life extension, because it's really the breakdown of that negentropic dynamic, and the phase transition with going from negentropy to entropy, that information exchange. It's really the breakdown of that is where you start to get diminishment of life force. So
Right.
it's really almost as simple as, if you understand the function, the dynamics that are supporting and maintaining that negentropy, and you support them, even like via technology, you will have life extension.
Right. And people might think, wow, life extension, that's a strange idea. But we've seen it in history, right? Clearly, life spans have increased dramatically, doubled since the last few hundred years. And so there is no reason that should end, right? It's just that it's been shown in laboratory, for instance, that cells can stay alive given the correct environment for an unknown amount of time. Like, they're still alive. I think they started those cell cultures some 40 years ago, I believe. Is that correct? Like those chicken cells that they've been keeping alive for 40 years or something like that?
Yeah, there's I think even the what's called the Gila cell line, I think it was established in the early 70s. So I mean, it's getting
Okay.
close to even 50 years now. And it's called immortalized cells because as long as there's the proper nutrients, the proper environment, they will go on indefinitely.
Right. So they're already set up to be, eternal.
Mhm, mhm,
You just have to give them the right environment.
mhm.
And we can do that if you understand the mechanism that provides that. And basically the right environment that's given to those cells is nutrition, right? And good flow so that excrements or like the the metabolism is able to breathe the toxins out, and they can be removed, right? So basically the flow has to be good and the energy level of that flow have to be high, right? And that is where the ATP connection comes in, and all this. And so this is something of like great interest. I think it's really important. And it's a consequence of understanding the nature of the information that produced the neg entropy, which is information going into the system. So, you can make a direct associations with these equations that are coming out now, that the gravitational field, the flow in of the Planck plasma is, the dynamics of the neg entropic side of creation, if you'd like. And the flow out, which is the electromagnetic field, is the entropic side of, and that links as well with thermodynamics because, entropy equations are thermo equations as well. And, the Stephen Boseman's constants, and, and so now you can understand, like, because people commonly forget that, like, the body, for instance, is a carnal engine. It's producing a lot of thermodynamics in a day, at about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and at 24/7 for 80 years. So it really has to, like the concept that a certain amount of energy, of course, is extracted from the environment, right? So but that's exactly, like, in conceptual notion, you can see how that's what I've been describing, right? Like you can even think of the food you're ingesting as information in, right? And you break it down to create more organization, which is again neg-entropic, right? So you break it down. You actually, there's a phase transition that is entropic in the food, then breaking down. However, the organism is increasing in coherency and energy, so it's becoming neg-entropic. So all these things and all the information as a result, right? So you radiate thermodynamically, and that is what you call being alive, and you do things, you experience things, you see things, you interpret things, you do things, you move things around in the space, and all this is information going back in, as well, into the system, right? And the cost of that is the electromagnetic radiation or the temperature of your body. And so if you can maintain a negentropic level of energy production in the system, it will continue to stay organized. And that is really an amazing possibility for humanity.
And of course, the mitochondria and ATP production is at the core, at the heart of that process.
Mhm.
So it's kind of the central point that if you can boost or augment the function there, you can maintain that increasing coherency, that negentropic function.
Mhm. Exactly. Very profoundly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you could think of it as well as you could imagine that consciousness, is the flow of that information. So what's going in is information from the outside, and then what's coming out is the actions that you do in the space that's changing the space. And since everything is built from the same structure of space, when you change the space, you're actually changing the information in the universe, and it has a local effect, right? Things have changed around and you've had to use energy to do that. And it has a non-local effect because all these things are embedded in the structure of space, which is the structure that makes up all the things. So when you move anything in the space, you actually are impacting all the other relationships in that space, and it's dampening across the scales, but there's still impact that ripples out, right? And so consciousness in that case is actually, the information moving out in terms of your interpretation of the field, and the information moving back in, the feedback, you know, of because your senses are, showing, like, interpreting the field and feeding it back to the system. So you can see it at different scales of the biology, but these are all connected. And that's why you can have a biological entity that becomes self-aware because there's feedback.
And I see that as, a very significant part of getting humanity into the next level, like a next level civilization. There's like three pivotal things: novel propulsion mechanisms, so like gravitational control, over unity energy, so the available the ability to access clean and nearly limitless energy, and life extension, because it's so relevant, because it really, I believe, will change the perspective of people when their lifespan isn't so short. Because I mean 70 years, really,
Yeah.
on a universal time scales,
Yeah.
the blink of an eye.
Imagine that 80-year-old is a teenager,
Wow.
Yeah. So their life experience and the wisdom, hopefully, that you gain during that time is not at the end of your life, but it's at the beginning of your life. And that's, and that's how a society evolves into a actually very advanced society, because when you have a few hundred years to get experience, you come up with some pretty cool shit.
Yeah.
But and then the other thing is that people may think, well, how do you deal with the overpopulation problem? So that's why what you mentioned actually complements these three things, are like fundamental. And of course, a civilization that has an infinite amount of time for their life because they can keep their cells alive, doesn't have an overpopulation problem, because as a result of that same technology, they have gravitational drives, and so they can go anywhere they want. And so the population can increase very, because you can terraform other planets, you can, you can extend your reach to the solar system, the galaxy, jump from one galaxy to another eventually, and then eventually jump from one universe to the other. So the whole kind of the whole package comes together with one fundamental, link between those three things, and that is a unified understanding of the physics of creation. And at least, in terms of its dynamics and mechanics that are known enough to be able to plot an engineering course to produce this technology, which has been done. So this is very, very, it's nice that you mention it, because as well, it really as well unify a person in its understanding of electric fields and gravity, where people may not relate to this as something that's part of their body. They not necessarily think of themselves as an electromagnetic being or a gravitational being, and even less a gravitational being. And so, however, of course, the atoms you make produce gravity. The atoms you're made of produce gravity, and the cells you make with them, and so on. And you do have a gravitational mass, and it represents a specific set of information, and that set of information does radiate electromagnetically, and has quite a bit of electromagnetic, circuitry and electric fields as well, and as well as magnetic, and ATP production is from little electron ripping, proton ripping motors in the mitochondria, right?
Yeah. So it's the ATP synthase is ran by a proton flux. So in the mitochondria, in every cell in our body, it's doing little subatomic rearrangements where it's taking electrons and protons, segregating them, creating a proton gradient, and it can use this electron flux and this proton flux to generate all of the electrical and electromagnetic energy of the cell, the body.
Yeah, while spinning at 8,000 RPM at rest, and up to 60,000.
Up to 60,000 RPM.
Yeah.
A jet engine on an airplane is about 10,000 RPM. So I mean, these things can spin.
Yes, they're non-trivial energy event, because they're doing that as well inside a fluid, right? So you can imagine the fluid having certain levels of vorticity and dynamics that are important as well.
Because it must be coherent, so that you're not having drag,
or minimal drag.
Minimal drag.
Yeah. And at that scale, at those speeds, you're approaching, high plasma condition, or high ion conditions in the fluids, right? You have large charge separation between the protons, so you have a gradient that's driving some significant energy event, and you're making ATP out of it. And you make a lot of it, right?
At rest, you'll make in a single day your body weight worth of ATP. You know, it's regenerated. So because it's got an adenosine core molecule, which is actually a nucleoside, and then it's adding high energy phosphate groups, PO4, to this nucleoside. And so the energy exchange, which is also like an electrical modulation in the cell, is exchanging that high energy phosphate group. It'll go along and it'll attach those to proteins and use it to polymerize DNA and virtually every enzymatic function in the cell. The ATP is involved in that. And then it'll go back to the ATP synthase and get another high energy phosphate group put on, and the cycle repeats. But I mean, that's at rest, your body weight. So I mean, imagine you're running a marathon, hiking a mountain. I mean, you're talking about like the amount of ATP you'll regenerate. Then it gets into like levels of like a metric ton of ATP.
And the things are spinning at 60,000 RPM for a long period of time. Like not just a moment of increase, but actually it's continuous, right? It continuously spins. It's very, very efficient motors, right? And so and then all that produce the protein, and then you get these organization modes of these proteins, right?
Well, the conformation, the 3D configuration of the proteins determines almost entirely their function, which is determined by the water. The water in the cell nearly completely determines how these proteins are going to fold in the three-dimensional configurations they're going to adopt. And then, so the ATP, it'll come along, and when it puts one of those high energy phosphate groups onto the protein, it causes a change in the geometry and the configuration. And that's oftentimes like what activates a protein for like a cellular signaling cascade. It's a modulatory process. And it's regulated by the ATP.
And it's right.
And water.
I mean, that's where they see the signal come from, right? Right.
Yeah.
So the important part there is almost thinking about it as like putting rocks in the flow of a river, because you have these things spinning, and so you have fluid dynamics that are producing very specific geometries in the water interaction, right? Like you have vortices in the water that are in relationship to each other, right? Because all this is spinning. And so you can imagine that if you're putting different proteins, they're gonna lock into these zones in the fluid dynamics, right? And then they're gonna be in very specific relationship to each other, like for instance DNA, right? This is so you can imagine like basically life is fluid dynamics, right? Because the water is the source of life, that has kind of arranged matter, or like the energy of the water itself arranging the structure of life in some ways. You can think of it that way. And these conformation change is like when you add a protein, right? You change the flow of the water so that the water change the position of the of the matter in it, right? And that changes the information of that section that impacts information around that section, and and again and again, and so that the system is it's called weak coupling, right? So that there is always there's a coupling function, which is basically the water, right? It's like when you put metronome on like you put 100 metronomes on the table, and you start them all at different times, they're gonna stay random, right? But if you put them all on the table that has wheels that can move, then you start all the metronomes, and eventually they all couple to the table and they become all synchronized, right?
And that's been experimentally observed, that weak coupling function of water. So like if you have a microtubule, it's a protein polymer that has a hollow tube, essentially, what's called the lumen space. And in that space, it's molecularly ordered water. So i.e. highly structured, coherent water. Dr. Anirban Bandyopadhyay at MIT, he extracted single microtubules from neurons, put them between two gold electrodes, and this is being done with like an electron microscope, and they measure the current, the conduction across the microtubule with the water in the channel, and it's like this nonlinear conduction of the current. So it's like there's some kind of like coherent effect of the microtubule itself, because it's almost akin to like a superconductor. I mean, it's not superconduction per se, but it's akin to that. But then when he evacuated the water from the microtubule, all coherence was lost. So it's like the monomers, the units of the microtubule were synchronized or coherent via the water, and acting as like a weak coupling medium.
Of course, because life emerged from it. Right, so it would not, if water cannot just be a neutral medium that you can ignore. It's you have to look at the dynamics you're observing in the context of the fluid dynamics of the water, because it's everywhere in biology. It's quite wet, right?
Yeah.
So but yeah, that's not been considered so much. It's starting finally, but it's an important part. Maybe we should take some questions, right?
Okay. Yeah. And there was a couple other things that I was just going to mention real quick, in terms of the Resonance Academy, in that we've got a couple new courses that are coming out. So I think you already mentioned Module 8 is coming out soon. Alan Green, that's his last name, right? Alan Green has a new course coming out. And so I'd strongly recommend folks to check out his new course that's coming out, because his work is just mind-blowing, so amazing. And you did an interview with Alan.
Yeah, I just did one yesterday. And I don't know when it's gonna air. Probably next week sometime.
Okay.
But Alan has done amazing stuff on decoding remarkable hidden codes in various structures around the world, but as well in the sonnets of of Shakespeare, and the result is kind of like mind-boggling.
It's like you almost can't believe that there could be those kind of hidden codes, but he makes a pretty compelling case.
It makes a really compelling case,
Yeah.
and it's well known that great, œuvre d'art, art, accomplishments that happen throughout history, that their authors commonly hid codes, in them. Things that at the time they would have been hung by the toes if they were, like caught talking about that stuff. So they had to hide it. They had to make them, codes that they could embed in either, paintings, sculptures, buildings, or, writings that have different meanings and so on. And it's really kind of remarkable what Alan has uncovered, and I really appreciate his approach. So people should check that out for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And if you haven't already, sign up to become a contributing member. We'd certainly appreciate the support and growing the community.
Yeah, it's critical.
So we've got a question I'm going to take from the top because it's got a lot of votes. So this is definitely a very popular question. This is from Aline Fowl, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she asks, do you have a theory about people who go for years without eating and are doing very well? What is going on in their bodies according to unified physics? Merci.
That's good. Breatharians. Yeah. Can we bring her on?
What's her name again, William?
Aline.
Oh, Aline.
Aline, okay.
Aline. And so, yeah, I mean, there is, well, okay. So this is something I've studied in depth. Hi, Aline.
Hi.
T'es québécoise?
Non, je suis française.
Française, ah oui, désolé. Oui. So we'll answer in English because we're on the English one.
Of course.
Yes, but right. So I've studied in details because of personal experience, and because it was the only experiment I could do when I lived in my van, right? To prove to myself that the vacuum energy that feeds all the atoms can feed the body. And so, and that the energy that we extract from food is not all the energy that, the body utilize. And so I had learned to meditate when I was younger, and when I was 11, and one of the technique was a technique to learn to taste the structure of the vacuum, basically, right? The prana, it can flow into your throat. And that technique I had practiced for a long time by the time I was in the van in my 30s. And I really didn't have much money. I didn't have much resources. And so my budget was about $2,500 Canadian dollars per year during one of the years at least. And so I just kind of stopped eating. Like living in a van, if you don't eat, it's much easier, right? You don't have to try to cook. You don't have to keep food cold. You just skip the whole thing. You don't have to do dishes. You don't have to go and get food at the store. All of a sudden you save a whole lot of time. And I was studying really hard. So I was studying 20 hours a day. The rest of the time I was meditating. I didn't sleep much. And I, like had a few hours of sleep every night, maybe like 1 or 2. And then I would climb in the morning at sunrise. I would climb at sunset as well. And the rest of the time I was studying. And I was a solo climber, so it was great. I didn't have to find a partner or anybody. I just put my shoes on and boop, I was up a few thousand feet. And so my life was very, very clean, very, very calm. I didn't have computers. I was very, very meditative in my experience. And I was able then to get this little drop, that of this nectar of space-time to drop in my throat. I believe it comes from the pineal gland. That's a theory I have. I haven't been able to confirm it. William could probably help me on that, but there's liquid crystal in the pineal gland, and there's possible access into the sinus cavity so that eventually it would drop into your throat. In any case, multiple people have been able to do this. I didn't know at the time. I just did it because of, needs. But I found out later that there was, movement that started, I believe, later that was called Breatharianism. And then more Western people did it. Before, it was mostly sadhus in India. And then I eventually one of those sadhus in India was checked out by NASA and in, India, in hospitals and so on. And there is very good reports on the tests that were done. And, the person was in his late 60s, late 70s. And he had been a breatharian since he was 18. And, that's, so I'm giving you all the history. I know your question is like, how is it possible? But I just want to make sure, because I want to make sure the viewers know that, like, they might think that's not possible, but it's been done. And for me in my van, it was very much about experimenting to see, okay, I'm writing equation, I'm writing physics saying that the vacuum feeds everything. Well, can I feed directly off the vacuum? Let's try and see how it feels, because I knew that, like, when I would stop eating for like a week, I would lose appetite and I would be just fine. When you do those fasts, les jeûnes, and so you fast for a few days, and then at first you're hungry, but after a while you're fine. And so I was thinking, well, how long can I be fine, right? And so this is a really important part for people to understand, and that is that according to this, and again, all this I need to put rigorous mathematics to, and I think I can now, so that's coming. But I'm actually really sure I can, because I was talking about that earlier. But basically, the energy production of the body can be directly extracted from the structure of space. And the mechanism is pretty direct if you understand that the energy that produced the proton and the electron come from that source, and those things are what makes up the cells. And and then you understand the mechanism, what to look for instance, which would be fluid dynamics and angular momentum and all this stuff we were discussing. So it's compatible with the concept that you can make technology that keeps the fluid dynamics going the right way, so that, so that cells don't die. That's the same idea, is that, sadhus have been doing this for a long time. And even my grandpa lived to 128 years old, which is pretty good. And at the time, especially, and so, it really is really important. It's an important thing to understand the mechanics of this biology. The mechanics of biology, but then eventually the mechanics of consciousness, which is related, meaning that from the same source of the vacuum fluctuation, you have the source of information that connects you to the whole thing. So it's not like the vacuum is birthing this thing and it's separate from it. It's like a conduit for information. And when you think about yourself that way, it can produce really enlightened results, like really enlightened results. It's remarkable. Including, the fact that you might be able to locally modify gravity, which sadhu have been able to do as well. So, that is another consequence. So there's all kinds of really incredible consequences, including if we live 200 years, we'll be a whole lot wiser. Yeah. I'm just horrified every time somebody passes that, every individual have so much experience that they've accumulated, in an 80-year period or 100-year period. And, there's so much wisdom that they hold that they are not able to pass directly on. It's passed non-linearly, right? Because it's in the space, and so the space is getting better. But hopefully from generations to generation, the thing evolves to more coherent, not less coherent. Yeah, so there's all kinds of ways you can go on forever, into this description. So I'm gonna stop, but yeah.
Yeah.
Why were you asking the question?
Because excuse my English is not very good. I'm eating only one time a day at noon since 8 months, and I have more energy than I never have. And I think about people who don't eat at all, and I read a lot of books, and I build my own theory about that, including easy water, ATP, and DNA, and so on. I just want to know if you and I know that you live 3 years, I think, without eating.
Yes.
And I can't believe that you live that without thinking about that. And I want to know what you think about that.
That I did that without thinking about it. Is that what you said? C'est ça que tu voulais dire?
Oui.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think it just becomes a natural state, just like the natural state of eating. But absolutely, intermittent fasting, what we call intermittent fasting, is most likely more the natural cycle. I know that or the natural cycle that emerge when you increase in coherency, right? This is why I always bring back the consciousness part, because it's part of the flow, right? So your consciousness, if it's part of the flow, can change the flow as well, right? Like you can make it better. So I think that what's happening is that we're making the flow better. So we need less breakdown, because it's massive. Every time you eat, right, then the body has to break down all this stuff, and it's using massive amount of energy doing that. And that's why you have more energy, is because you are not doing that. So during, and so for me, my meal of the day is at night, right? So during the day, I'm just drinking water, lots of water, and I'm feeling, energized all day. If I eat a meal during the day, when I cheat, because I have a meeting or something, and I eat a meal during the day, afterwards, it's like, oh, I'm like entropy kicks in, because it's got to break all this stuff up, and now it's got to, transfer it and all this. So if you, so imagine this, like people have a certain percentage of the vacuum energy it's using, and a certain percentage of the energy they're getting from the food, right? The environment that they're using. And that percentage change, it's not the same for everybody, right? You can increase it or you can decrease it, right? And so as you like, and so the thing that increases it or decreases it happens to be your awareness, your consciousness, right? It's you're being, the first part is being aware that that is a source of energy you can tap, right? Like that's the first step, is to realize, oh, there's a source of energy and I'm already tapping it. I just want to increase how much I'm tapping it, right? So like you can reduce everything to 1 meal a day. So that's already gonna produce like a gradient, so that you can extract more and more energy from the vacuum from, and so you feel energized, you feel healthy, right? You feel, you sleep well.
I need less sleeping.
Right, less sleeping, exactly. So you can imagine, if you push it till you're breatharian, then you need almost no sleep, right? Because it's like you're just energized, right? You don't have this entropic part is minimized, right? So sleeping is recuperating, right? Well, it's the negentropic part of your day, right? In 24 hours. And so since you're already extracting energy from the vacuum, the negentropic part is like all through the day, is as if you were sleeping, right? So now you don't need to actually lay down, close your eyes and do the thing, or you very little of it, right? So it's a different way of living. It's biohacking, right? Yeah. And then you can imagine we can do it with technological means, right? Because if we understand how to engineer the vacuum, then we understand how to couple that to a biological entity so that you're extracting energy. Yes, correct. That was the first step. Yeah, that's the first step. There's more coming behind. But it's exciting. I'm looking forward to that part, because we're not getting younger. So actually we are, if we do this.
We are young.
Exactly.
Thank you, Nassim.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, La France.
Great question. Yeah, you can also see just a lot of very beneficial physiological responses to intermittent fasting, like increases in human growth hormone, secretion. Human growth hormone, like longevity clinics right now, they inject human growth hormone as an anti-aging, as a longevity inducing product. But HGH, just as one example, it's inhibited by food intake. So if you're doing like fasting or intermittent fasting, you're boosting HGH levels, and this is a known longevity inducing compound in the body. So it's like the physiological responses to intermittent fasting. It's just like one of the healthiest things you can do.
Yeah, it has to be coupled with a good practice of, the concept, meaning like people you have to listen to your body and see where, like throughout the day, and see how you're feeling and what you need to do. But absolutely, I think that it's definitely going into the correct direction for optimal health. Breaking fast, breakfast, is a way to energize the body at the beginning of the day that has a huge entropic impact on the body capacity to emerge from, the sleep time and build up energy. And, I recommend exercise instead, to build energy in the body in the morning. And then from there, you can see, for me, I surf every morning, as many mornings as I can. I'm pretty busy, but usually I'm up around 6:30, latest 7, and I'm in the water, and I get an hour and a half of surfing. And if I can't surf, then I run, or I do other exercises. And then when I'm done, I'm actually, in a state of really high energy. I get a good shower, and I'm ready to start my day. And if I don't get caught up in the concept that, oh, I should eat because I just exercised, if I just, and I don't give in to right away, or, like the feeling of comfort of putting something in your mouth and, eating, like, then I start my day and I go all day, it's no problem. And, at this point, I eat one meal in the evening. Usually I can eat anything. I can eat anything. Of course, I eat as clean as possible in terms of eating organic and so on. But my physiology is happy with whatever I throw at it. And
that's the nice thing about that practice, is that you don't really have to worry about a diet, just because whatever you put into your body, it's going to get used for that one meal a day.
Yeah, and your body will break it down. It will get it out. So it's, and then I a few hours before bed, and and when I go to bed, I'm good. I typically sleep well. I don't sleep much because I don't need much sleep, but I have moments where I have more stress in my life where I don't sleep as well. And that's when I have a tendency to overeat as well, and things like that. So, I mean, we're talking far from physics now, but I just...
So actually, will you be able to switch gears to talk about black holes after talking about diet and exercise? Because actually, that's one of our next questions at the top of the list. This is from Oriana. She asked, what is the dynamic of time and space near a black hole? Does time reverse inside as an effect of spin counterspin of the double torus singularity.
Oh, okay. Is this Oriana?
Oriana? Uh-huh.
Okay, or can we bring her on because, or him? I think it's a her, yeah.
Her.
Hi. We've met before.
Oh, I've known you for many years. Actually, I did a workshop with you in Ashland, Oregon.
Oh my God. That was a long time ago.
So what? I've been following you for a long while, Nassim.
2005.
2005? Yeah, okay.
Well,
But yeah.
well, you see, you said to me that the point of the point of most influence was to be found inside, to go internal, and with that quantum field. So I've been exploring that space ever since, and just had a talk with William about the singularity in the heart of this double torus that I was feeling inside that singularity. And so that I'm curious now of the black hole in physics, that is where time appears to reverse. But what I'm feeling is that time, and this is the way I've imagined it, time is like a pebble that is all-inclusive, one time, perpetual motion, all that is and ever will be. And as it enters space as a first dimension, it ripples into where we are in the wave of it coming from the source. And we call, the closer it is to the source, we call past. What is yet to ripple out is what we call future.
Very good.
Nonetheless, the time, if it collapses back into this black hole, wouldn't reverse. It may seem to reverse in the past, but really what it's doing is compressing space. And in that compressing space,
very good,
a counter spin of the dynamic. Now that counter spin then becomes a feedback. All space compressing, well, all data would be compressing, right? The data itself.
Right.
Singularity, and then the feed forward is all that compressed data that the black hole, that must be the conscious place. And the point of most influence then is that moment that's not yet here. All time that is not present and yet exists in the simultaneity of it, that we only experience as that double torus becomes the observable universe, the Planck scale, that now is expanding. And as Inez was saying, that it continues to expand at all scales of the, first off, I said, well, then light would be a double torus. And she said, yes, the photon, as it becomes observable from light waves, is held in the data of the double torus, that then time is expanding to then become the proton.
That's right. Yeah.
Compresses, that spin is the dynamic balance that compresses all the data points within that point of most influence.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, that's the model in general. You got it right. And yes, I mean, the analogy to time, you have to be careful because time is a concept of man. It's better to think of it as a flow of information, right? So a flow out and a flow in. And so you made a relationship to this. So think of a path when you said is more compressed, right? So from the external observer of a particle that's falling into a black hole, the particle appears to be stuck in time, right? So as it arrives at the horizon, right, it has, because of Lorentz contraction, well, in this case, Lorentz dilation, time has become infinitely long, meaning you can't, it's going to take an infinity of time for the particle to reach the event horizon. So to you, it looks like it's frozen in time, right? However, that's not the proper coordinates. The proper coordinates are the coordinates of the particle that's falling into the black hole. And the particle that's falling into the black hole doesn't experience anything different. It just continues to accelerate towards singularity. And so this is really where it can get confusing when you're starting to talk about time. So it's better to talk about flow, because flow is the true movement of the material, whether it's a particle falling into the black hole, or whether you want to think of it as a bit of information falling into the black hole. It's following the flow dynamics of that structure. And from any point of view on the grid, you can say that's a past and that's a future, right? From any point of view on the grid, right? And then
from the perspective of space-time.
Yeah, from the perspective of space. And so so you can imagine that the space then is more and more twisted, right, as it gets closer. So that's what you were talking about, the compression.
Compression.
Yeah, the compression
of space
of
itself.
space, exactly. So that we could do an analogy that the speed of light, right, is actually, always the same, because it's the speed of the flow, right? But when we see light slow down in medium, right, or it's because it's taking a longer path, right? Meaning,
right. So space is warping the
more warped,
light.
more, yeah. So now it appears like it's slowing down to an external observer, and so that concept it might be a little difficult to understand. Actually, it's pretty mechanical, but it's fundamental to actually solving special relativity conceptually appropriately. But so that's why when you say the word time, it's complicated in physics, because there's proper time, and then there is the observer time, and there's the relationship between the two. And so if I understand your question properly, you're asking, you're stating that the center is then the present, if you'd like, because it has all the times, embedded in it, right? So for instance, if you think of a torus, what's in the middle of a torus?
The vortex.
Yeah, but what's in the very middle?
Well, if it's a double torus, it'd be a singularity. Now,
yeah,
I would assume it would be a singularity also in a torus, but it would be different dynamics that would create a double torus and a torus. And I asked this question of you, we ran out of time, didn't get the answer to when does a double torus actually create that as a
when does a torus become a double torus? As soon as it's spinning.
Okay.
Yeah, as soon as it's spinning, it's producing, Newtonian forces, meaning like Coriolis and centrifugal forces that produce an equator and divides the structure.
Right, but a torus doesn't have a counterspin to it, does it?
It depends yeah, it does, yeah, because it has, if it's spinning, right? Again, if it's spinning, it's a complex, it's a quadrupole, right? And it has a complex relationship of uh, of spin counterspin, meaning that, like, you know, if you have a spin one way, you have a counterspin the other way, right? It's so it's a complex relationship between the spin and the counterspin inside. So you can't just define it as like the top part and the bottom part. It's it's a relationship that's more homogeneous in the whole space, meaning you have region that are spinning, region that are counter spinning, and they're layered. So for instance, if you look at stars in the outer halo, right, of galaxies, they are counter spinning relative to the galaxy. So they're thought to be in retrograde, right? And so, you know, think of fluid dynamics when you have, think of water going down the drain in your tub, there's air coming out, you know, there's not just the water going down, right? So, and the air is coming out in the opposite spin. So you can imagine that on a double torus. And so as soon as you have spin, you're going to produce these dynamics, meaning you will have a toroidal rotation, but you will have as well a palladial rotation. And the two together produce that dynamic, okay? And so, you know, the idea that time reverses in a black hole is only from a perspective, you know, of an external observer, right? And so it really is, it's valid in terms that, like, from the external observer, it's like the space-time vectors became, you know, the space-times. So you have 4 vectors, like 3 of space and 1 of time, right? And when you reach the horizon, they flip, so that the space-like vectors become space-time, or time-like vectors, and the time-like vector becomes space-like, right? So
right. Well, that's what I was calling time space. It's space time, time space, and it appears that it interfaces at that black hole point.
Right. Well, no, space time is there everywhere. It's just that at the black hole there's a discontinuity, right? That has to do with actually the angular momentum going to 0, because there's counterspin and spin at that region, right? And that's the surface that's defined there. And so, you know, it's complex. I'm trying to make this, you know, it's a really complex discussion, because there's a problem in the interpretation because of our understanding of time and our understanding of the observer relative to time, and, you know, and what is the universe actually experiencing? Is the universe experiencing time like we think of time? Not really, you know. So how is the universe experiencing time? Well, it's most likely experiencing time as evolution, which means that so then if you can associate evolution with flow dynamics, It's an increase. You see what I'm saying?
Right, yeah. And I also mentored with Barbara Marx Hubbard for a year.
All right.
Yeah. And my last talk with Barbara was, Barbara, where is this evolutionary impulse? Where is it encoded within us? And she gave me a beautiful Aurobindo answer about going quiet and finding it and feeling it within. I said, oh, it's lovely, but where is it within our biology? Where is all this information? And she said, I remember her reaching out her hands to me and she said, Oriana, that's your great question to follow. So that was my answer, and I've been following it.
That's a total Elizabeth Soteris answer.
But
Dr. Soteris.
But the evolutionary plane, then what I looked for was where is the entelechy of evolution, right? So an acorn has the entelechy to be an oak tree. Where is that oak tree-ness encoded within that little nut?
Right.
And at the same time, where is evolution, this compressed knowing of time, space, time, or time, space? If it's a feedback feed forward, then it must feed forward from the origin of existence in this universe, which
Correct.
When is that essentially called the Big Bang? But wouldn't that Big Bang be happening in every moment? That's
right.
One moment
right.
at the subplanckian scale that then expands until it becomes a huge space we call Planck. And then it continues to expand, and time itself, if you're saying it doesn't, but it's more like what's it moving through? If you're calling time flow, what's it flowing through?
Right.
And it would have to flow through the still, that is one point when we observe it as a point, or it's everything that is, that we're looking at all the movement, perpetual motion that we call flow, movement. But what are we measuring is, oh, 1 month. Oh, how about one full cycle of the moon? The amount of movement of our little home world here, oh, we call it a day. So we're measuring time, we're actually measuring movement.
Correct. That's why I was saying it's better to think about it in terms of flow. You know, it's better to think about it in terms of flow, because the concept of time is really a concept of man, right?
Right, but still I come back to, if we're measuring movement and everything appears to me to be perpetual motion, but it's moving through still, where movement is non-existent, right? So that still point is non-existent movement that then holds all movement, just as a symphony of all the music ever written, for all the instruments ever played, for all the melodies. It all has one thing in common, which is the rest in between the notes, where the notes are non-existent. That rest is the same non-music that holds all the symphony. But
the center, the eye of the hurricane.
Right, but it's the rhythm that I'm getting to.
Right.
So now I come to the time crystal that I got from Resonance Academy, that they didn't found the time crystals, right? That have a periodic repeating pattern in time. Well, what a great place for evolution to encode all that knowing without taking up file cabinets, a pulsing. Right. So then I was talking to William about the pulsing of the centriole as it comes into the heartbeat, when that first pulse, and that heart rate variability that heart math measures has a pulsing aliveness that is evolution encoded and informing. How does evolution inform us? In the point of most influence is just before it comes into form. Oh, it's being informed from all that is and ever will be in that moment.
The vacuum from here. The pulse you're describing is a pulse in the vacuum, and you know that's why I try to avoid the term time, so yeah, say it's difficult. The answer I was trying to get from you when I was asking you what's in the middle of a torus, it's the hole, right? So if there's a hole in the middle of the torus, right, it's the vacuum, right? The space. So
You're saying
imagine
it's a hole in space.
yeah, so imagine something that's producing a large gradient density change, right? You could try to do it linearly, but it'd be much easier to do it spinning something and then like, creating a depression in the center, right? So by centrifugal and Coriolis force.
But wouldn't that be where motion itself becomes non-existent?
Right,
That
because
you're calling a hole, what is it comprised of?
yeah, so but that's the thing.
The whole of nothing, right?
No, the whole of everything. That's the thing.
Oh,
This
okay.
is why I was getting you there. So imagine you have that torus. It's in the fluid dynamics of the structure of space-time, right? It's been made by the fluid of dynamics of space-time spinning in that region, right? So you have a fluid, it's spinning, this ball is spinning in the middle. What you're like, if you're trying, like if you would say, where would be the link between the vacuum that's outside this ball, right? And the vacuum that's inside this ball, where would it be?
Right in the center.
Right. So that means that the center can transmit the information to all the space around it.
Right.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying
it's
is
not discontinuous of the space. It's not isolated. It's not isolated to all the space because it's a torus, right? If it was a perfect sphere, it would be isolated, but it's not, right?
But what's the torus moving through?
It's in that fluid. It's in the structure of space, in the Planck field.
Right, but that's what I'm calling the still, rather than calling it time. I'm referring to still.
Yeah, but wait. You can't do that because if you take the space, right, and you say, well, it's stillness, not quite, because it's inside. It's only still to your frame of reference. It's inside a larger bubble that's spinning. So it's not still. It has fluid dynamic. It's just that these fluid dynamics locally are more chaotic, right? So you don't see the order of that stuff. You only see the order of the smaller thing you're looking at, where there is order in the behavior of the field. Do you understand?
Okay, so inside a proton would be the still, of which everything is the double torus is spinning.
Inside the proton, right?
Yeah.
You would locally, if you were small, right? Like if you were a Planck, you would locally think that it's still, right? But the whole thing is actually spinning at the speed of light, right? So, but locally, because you're so much smaller, right? You're like, or you would see the movement as being really slow, right? Like, because the activity there.
Yeah, I think what I'm making a point is that I'm not calling still a point. I'm saying still is like the background. That is all the vacuum of space. Everything's moving through still.
You're correct. It's just that yes, locally, but if you consider the fractal nature of the thing, everything is spinning, right? Like, meaning everything is so all, like, maybe locally you can say, yeah, I'm it's still around me, but then this is spinning in the middle of it. But it's better to think about it as coherent phase is the thing, and decoherent phase, or like where it's chaotic locally, it appears like stillness. It appears like nothing, right? Do you see?
So what's before the Big Bang? What is that?
The Big Bang is happening all the time, meaning that matter is being produced at the horizon of black holes, and so there's matter production in the universe, which was the opinion of Einstein, by the way. That paper was lost but found in 2013. And Einstein mechanism was that matter was being produced by the vacuum. But so the Big Bang, it's the same dynamic at all levels. You can think of it as, the structure of space in another universe, right? That a proton emerged from into this larger universe, right? And you can imagine that a change in density that would occur, right? Because this larger universe is like the universe that it came out of would look like a proton to this larger universe. So when it came out, of course, it expands, tremendously. And what's going on inside that universe, to a person looking inside that universe, they would think that there was a Big Bang and that everything expanded very, very fast to its size. But
wouldn't both things have to happen? In other words, the compression and expansion have to be simultaneous, in that if you have a hologram of a picture, and the more that you chop up the picture into smaller and smaller pieces, the smaller the pieces, the more information that piece has to hold in comparison to its size.
Yeah.
The whole, so that it compresses all of that data into smaller and smaller fragments.
That's
at the
correct.
same time, it appears to expand simultaneously.
Right.
So
And
wouldn't that
as
become
it
the
expands,
feed forward?
yeah, exactly. And as it expands, it's displacing fluids on the outside, right? That flows in, right?
And fluid being just the dynamic of the flow.
Yeah,
not
because it's
material
expanding in
necessarily.
another universe, right? So then in that universe, space is not empty neither, it's full as well. And so that's flowing in, right? So that's why you can never lose the perspective of the scaling relationships, right? If you isolate the system too much, then you start to lose the flow dynamics of the scaling relationship.
Scalar. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I get that. Now, the ancients in their hieroglyphs spoke to the non-material realm and a material world. So the non-material realm being that the universe has always traveled in pairs. So the non-material flowed into a physical world. And what they said about the non-material world is that it had essentially infinite knowledge, because it had all time. So all time was simultaneous, but it had no ability to act, for there was no duration of time in which to act. And then it flows into the physical world, in which there's a duration of time, so an ability to act, but a incomplete knowledge, since time is the way it flows in, and so start to finish has a longer gap.
Yeah.
Sorry to interject, but we might make this the last comment. Just we're running out of time.
I'm sorry.
We're not going to be able to get to any other questions. So maybe we'll make this the last comment.
That was it. That's the whole, to me, this time space is what I've been calling time space, seems to be almost the reverse, as that black hole is that entry point to the compression expansion.
Yep. That's the way it is. It is expanding and compressing at the same time. It doesn't have a choice. It cannot expand and not compress, right?
Okay, and that non-material into the material then could be that expansion, compression.
Yeah, and expansion. Earlier Yeah. So earlier I
We
was
look at and
talking.
call it space.
Yeah,
Space.
earlier I was talking about how there's entropy and negentropy. So when it's expanding, it's entropy. When it's contracting, when it's compressing, it's negentropy. Right? So it's so you know, we can return it to that, or we can, you know, talk about it in many different ways. We could talk about it in terms of thermodynamics. You know, thermodynamics of black holes are really interesting. Inside the horizon, you know, more energy you put, colder it gets. And, you know, so there's all kinds of, yeah,
would make sense.
exactly. There's all kinds of, relationship we can make. But let's go to another question. So good to see you
I'll
again.
keep exploring. Thank you,
Yeah.
Nassim.
Thank you. I appreciate.
Because there's actually a question here that's kind of follows where some of that discussion was going into, like the inside of the proton, some of the dynamics going on in there. So this is from James Weinberg asking, how do PSUs and your approach to physics include quarks?
Include quarks.
Where do they fit into the picture,
Yeah,
if at all?
quarks are consequences of the standard model of physics.
James is no longer on the call, FYI.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
But you can still.
So this is not like so. This formalism, in the formalism I'm about to publish, these accounts, you know, of some of the particles that are in the standard model that have been measured directly. Quarks have been measured indirectly, but as a consequence of, you know, standard model quantum interpretation. So it's a quarks gluon mix. So gluons are the strong force interaction, and the strong force is very, very poorly described in the standard model in terms of its mechanics and how it actually function. So so I'm sure that some, you know, physicists will be able to take our paper and extract, you know, the quarks energy levels. They're there somewhere. We get we hadn't had time to finish the formalism for that. We've done the tau and the muon and many of the other particles and all this. So I'm sure it will come out. If it's fundamental, it will. If it's not, it won't. I wouldn't be surprised that it's not. And what I mean by fundamental, I don't mean it from the standard model view. I just want to be clear. The standard model view would say fundamental is something that can no longer be divided, like there's a fundamental constituent. And this is wrong interpretation, because all can be divided, and at least till the Planck scale and sub-Planck, I'm sure. So when I mean by fundamental, I mean that it is one of the divisions of space, you know, that energy level producing that particle, you know, at that scale, and so on. And so if quarks are fundamental in that sense, then they will be found from these equations I'm about to publish. I'm, you know, it wouldn't be any other way, because it's predicting everything else, including stars and galaxies, and, you know, because it's unified, it's no longer just quantum theory. That would be my answer to that.
Do you think it's possible that they might be interpreting some fractal substructure of the proton as a particle unto itself when it's not, so in that sense, it's not really a fundamental thing. It's just that
Right.
there's like fractal substructure and there's
Yeah.
a lot of interpretation being laid on top of it.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the problem with the standard models and the concept of accelerators, that if you collide protons at faster and faster rate, you get smaller and smaller particles, and that these particles are fundamental, they're constituent of the proton. That is a huge assumption. Never mind that these particles live like a billionth of a second, like they're like just like very ephemeral. So to me, it looks like much more like something that is returning to its vacuum state as soon as it can after you've ripped it off the surface of a proton, right? So, if the proton, and that is very solid at this point, is constituted of Plancks, well, these Plancks, can be, when collided, like when two protons collide, it can be sheared off in chunks, that since the Planck is billions and billions of times smaller than the protons, of course, you won't see the Plancks, right? So, and we don't have accelerators that can scatter Plancks anywhere close, right? The accelerator would have to, actually, that's interesting in some ways. If you calculated the energy of the accelerator, you would end up with a black hole for your accelerator in terms of its energy, though. So this is, so that's why we can reconcile with our equations clearly to some of these particles that are unstable, like the muon or the tau, which don't live. They live longer than these other ones, but they don't live that long, which are unstable states of the electron in some ways. And so we can reconcile with all of this because we can, from the Planck field, we have the equations of the division of space, and we know the scaling relationships, and we know the energy relationship of these scales, and so we can extract them. And so if the quarks are fundamental, they will be found with this as well. It's just that they're going to look different than the standard model interpretation. For instance, the spin problem of the proton demands that there is not just 3 up quark and 3 down quark. Demands that there is billions of them in there.
Yeah, because 3 quarks accounts for like 2% of the spin.
Right.
Proton.
Right. Yeah, and then there's issues there too. And yeah, I mean, it's so, and the contribution of the strong force to mass is a big issue in the standard model, where the Higgs mechanism only provides 4% the mass of the proton, and the rest is the strong force. Well, okay, but where are you pulling that energy out of, and so on. And so this is it's a complex problem in the standard model, which requires 21 free parameters to solve it. In these new equations, these things come out naturally if they really belong. And we can say that confidently because the same equations unify all of the constants of physics, unifies all of the scales that we observe outside as well, cosmologically. And they as well, most importantly, these equations unifies the forces with these scales and these constants, so that now you understand that the forces are contributing dynamics to the flow, right? You can think the flow produce forces, the forces produce flow. You can, look at it in both directions. but the result is that these, the forces and the particles are no longer separate in their different modes of the flow, if you'd like, at different scales. All right, so.
And of course, all the forces are unified, so it's a unified field description, general relativity and quantum mechanics,
Right,
unified under singular description.
right. That's required because one of the force is gravity, and it's a really important one. Actually, that's the keystone to the whole unification. It's just a analytical solution to gravity that relates quantum theory with gravitational fields in such a way that the gravitational field is no longer just weak at the quantum scale, because you're dealing with singularities, and these singularities produce large gravitational fields that are screened, and then the contribution to mass and all this comes out. I had that first piece early on with the holographic mass solution. It's just now I have all the mechanics of why that actually worked, right? So that's what.
And it's really exciting because you can see how electromagnetism relates to gravity and comes from gravity, how you can influence gravity from electromagnetism. So it's like you can really clearly start to see the technological applications for like gravitational control, because we understand how to control electromagnetism to a fairly well degree. So I think that's a really exciting aspect of the unification of those forces.
Yeah, exactly. And the particles, you could even think about, if you understand the mechanism well enough, that you could produce protons out of the structure of space, so you could actually, generate matter, like literally.
How about transmutation, like adding protons to elements?
Yes, that becomes possible too, because you understand the flow dynamics that makes up the nuclei and how they the interaction and so on. And so it becomes very possible to transform one element into another. And of course extract energy and so on. Meanwhile, but the replicator might not be too far off, right? So it's actually, and it's always funny because we see things in science fiction and then they become science fact, right? Like cell phones, fridge, everything, was always in science fiction. And so if we want to know the technology of the future, we just got to look at Star Trek episodes and Star Wars episodes and so on.
So we've got the warp drive, the star drive, the replicator, and then teleportation. That's a question we have here. We've got about 8 minutes. I don't know. Maybe you could just say a comment on it from Dustin. You've taught us that our reality is a fractal hologram, and that each moment is different because we constantly move to a different point in space-time. How or what is moving us, or even planets, to different points of this hologram? What's giving it motion?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a gradient in the energy density. It's a gradient. It's not homogeneous. As we were discussing earlier, it's very, very much compressed in one direction, right, towards the center, and it's decompressing on the other end. And so the gradient between the two, since you have a gradient to infinity, you have singularity in the center, right? So you have gradient to infinity in the center. You have a gradient to infinity as you get bigger, right, between scales. The density gradient is massive. Like the density gradient, this is how I resolve the vacuum catastrophe. The density gradient between the universe, which is 10 to the minus 30 grams per centimeter cube, to the density of the vacuum at the quantum level is 10 to the 93 grams per centimeter cube. You have this huge, like 120 orders of magnitude density gradient between the two. And so that's what produce angular momentum. That's what produce motion, the fluid dynamics and so on. It's a gradient to infinity in all directions. So yeah.
And you know, that's a question I think just about every Life with Nassim is, where does the spin come from? And so I just like to highlight that. Well, it's always there, because it's, as you said, it's scaling to infinity in both directions. So it's like at some scale, you always have that gradient present.
Right.
So it's kind of one
conserved.
of those.
It's conserved across scales, and so it's as soon as you put the gradient in there, now I have the equation. So as soon as you put the gradient in there, it's very, very beautiful. It's very straightforward, and it all makes sense very clearly. You can see like how the angular momentum, the spin dynamics produce thermodynamics effect, produce charge, produce electromagnetic effect, and produce gravitational effect, because there's there's a flow out, but there's a flow in, right, because of Coriolis effect and all this. And so it just it's a perpetual spinning proton or or Planck, or sub-Planck, or whatever, that's conserving the angular momentum across all the scales, right? So it's really it's actually really straightforward. It's a little bit mind-boggling, because it's very kind of like expanding, right? Because you have to always remember that the system is not closed. It's always open. So every time you do an analysis, you have to consider what that thing is in and how it's interacting with the rest. And it's the same thing with biology, right? Like we tend to isolate the proteins, isolate the matter, and not like the organized matter, and not take consideration of the molecules of water and the fluid dynamics of the whole thing, and which is most likely very, very important, because when we see these fluid dynamics go sideways, usually the cell is not very healthy, right? So we'll finish on this. I wanted to convey again that, like, we are gonna announce a conference coming up. It's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be in February, and we're gonna be able to hang together and talk about all these things for days, and go and visit incredible sites and talk about our real application to your life every day. Because at the end of the day, all these concepts, and I'd like to close on that, is that, why do you want to know all this stuff? Like, why would you want to know all this? Well, because that's the way you're made. That's the way the universe function that made you. And and your consciousness is a contributor to it. That's clearly a contributor to it. And it's really important to understand where that comes from, like to have a deep, a deep comprehension of your fundamental source. And like we were talking about, earlier with Breatharians and so on, the fundamental source is clearly something that is very profound in its, in its infinite nature, and to know that about yourself opens the door in your consciousness, in your day-to-day life, to actually explore and exploit the potential that that you live in, the energy potential you live in, like literally, like the amount of capacity that you have to interact with this field of fundamental connection of all things. This is something that has a really profound impact on your consciousness, and it really opens horizons that you can imagine in your capacity to do all kinds of things, including be healthy and strong and so on. And so on that, thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Thank you, William.
My pleasure.
It's been a great session. We went in all kinds of directions, but all the people out there, keep on track and keep putting a foot in front of the other. Keep loving the universe, which is you. And until next time, may the vacuum be with you. Thank you, everybody.